Despite the criticisms facing Star Wars Outlaws from all different kinds of creators on this humble platform we call YouTube, this is without a doubt the most fun I've had with a video game all year. When it hits, it is the open world Star Wars game that I have always wanted. But man, does it ever have some really big issues that should not be shipping with a AAA developer. I mean really big issues. So today I want to talk about Outlaws in great detail, so you can decide whether the game is for you and you can get a clear picture of what the game offers and how well it pulls it off in the seedy underbelly of a galaxy far, far away. The story of Outlaws is not one I thought I'd remember, let alone resonate with. I had my suspicions prior to launch that K-Vess would be an underutilized lead there simply to push the gameplay. Surprisingly, I was proven wrong. K-Vess is a well-rounded character with a troubled past, which you slowly learn about over the course of the narrative, and a boisterous personality despite the constant setbacks she faces. Her journey to undertake a large-scale heist and win the freedom she has always sought is compelling. She's not afraid to say no or fight for the things that are most important to her, even if it means diving headfirst into trouble. Throughout the story, Kay surrounds herself with nefarious characters to help her in her quest, and all of them are well written and interesting. I just wish they got more screen time to shine because they really don't get a lot here. They will talk about their lives in casual conversation and during missions, but we never really get to learn about them on a deep personal level like the Mass Effect games, of which Outlaws shares a lot of similarities. I found at times this hurt the big stakes the narrative was trying to evoke. The score is incredibly dangerous, but I didn't personally care if anything were to happen to any of the characters aside from Nyx, Kay's furry companion, who seems to ooze a lot more personality than most of these characters, which is unfortunate. That may have been intentional at the start of the game, but it clearly wants you to care about them as it goes on. For instance, ND5 and Kay's relationship was supposed to be the heart of the story, at least it seemed that way through the marketing, but their relationship only really starts to grow near the end of the game, and it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for that. However, I did like their banter because they have very opposing personalities. Kay is the witty loudmouth, while ND5 is cold and calculating, being an old Clone Wars era commando droid, which is honestly pretty sick.
Just, stay out of my way, alright? Now let's go.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, K-Vess.
Still, the overarching story has some clever twists I didn't see coming. It takes you all over the galaxy, meeting interesting characters, working for and building a reputation with the syndicates, and making choices that, well, they really don't seem to have any lasting consequences. But I think I may have to play the game through again to verify this because there are some narrative choices, but I just couldn't tell if it would actually change the narrative or not. The pacing was messy at times, with having to travel around big areas to find items and talk to people, which seemed to kind of drag it down a little bit. But I really appreciate that Massive created a tale in this long-running franchise that didn't focus on the norms of the movies or factions to create something engaging. It is very much a self-contained experience that doesn't neglect the established franchise, but it also doesn't rely so heavily on the good versus evil angle. Being able to partake in the criminal underworld has always been a lifelong desire of mine, and it doesn't disappoint. Well, for the most part anyway. You can't really play as a bad guy, but you can work for them, if that makes sense. It's a large part of the story as you mingle with the 4 syndicates to accomplish your goals. Siding with them can affect the world in minute ways, but I'm going to talk about more of that later. All in all, I was genuinely content when the credits rolled, so much so that I plan to play through it again once I finish with the open world activities. The writing and voice acting were surprisingly well executed and lacked a lot of cringe I was honestly expecting from a game like this. Even in the more minute roles, the voice acting was still great. Kay especially. She's written in a way that lends herself well to the smuggler archetype, with obvious nods to everyone's favorite scoundrel Han Solo. But the good news is Kay feels distinguishably different. She's not the jaded freelancer, but one that is still trying to make her own way in the galaxy with a lot she has to learn. She's a little overambitious and confident despite her lack of certainty. All of this lends itself well into how the story unfolds, but make no mistake, you aren't going to get character growth as deep as Arthur Morgan, with self-reflection and all that. Unfortunately, unlike Kay though, the main villain is entirely forgettable, Sliro, and just so you know, I actually had to go back into my gameplay footage I captured for this video to figure out his name, because that's how forgettable he is. He's just not a character you are really going to care about, remember, or even feel threatened by. In typical Ubisoft fashion, he shows up a handful of times, and each is just as boring as the last. He runs the Zarek Besh Syndicate, who is trying to take over the underworld for himself. They are the main threat of this game. It's just funny because at the very end of the game you get his full story, and it's actually kind of interesting. but it's just not effective because it's just there in the last few minutes of the game. But speaking of effective, the gameplay is comprised of a handful of different mechanics ranging from really fun to mind-numbingly boring. Boots on the ground combat, stealth, speeder combat, speeder exploration, and finally space combat. If you add in the traversal mechanics, slicing and lockpicking, and well, you have a complete package. But a complete package does not mean a perfect one. Outlaws uses all of these mechanics to push its gameplay along, and a lot of it feels like typical Ubisoft games, which is why I'm sure some people aren't going to pick this up solely because of that reason, because they're tired of that formula, which I totally understand. While there's lots of action to be had, I'd argue that Outlaws is like 70% stealth and 30% actual combat, the stealth being incredibly rudimentary too. Think of the latest AC games with the silent takedowns, the long grass to hide in, and the whistle feature to draw dumb AI to their deaths. The one new feature is Nyx, your furry companion who can distract enemies and destroy alarms without having to move the player at all. It lessens the risk, but having Nyx help out feels pretty damn cool. But for a game that has quite a few instant fail states if you get caught, it would have been nice to have more features like a hide a body system or even a disguise system that has been a plot detail in multiple films. I guess it doesn't really matter because the AI is so shallow it'll find bodies and not raise the alarm. I know a lot of people have issues with the lack of depth in these systems, and I don't blame them. A lot of this is present here, including instant fail states for certain stealth missions, but the AI is so easy to exploit, it's really hard to get caught in the first place, and the fast load times with the SSDs make getting caught really a non-issue for me personally. If you want action, there are lots of encounters where the player can actively choose to take a stealthy approach or go all out without fear of failure, especially with the open world missions. Blaster fire fills the air as you roll, duck, and blast foes in your way. The shooting feels responsive and fun with really good audio design. It's by no means Battlefront 2 in this regard, but it does get the job done. By upgrading, Kay can gain abilities to let her pick up weapons in the environment to use, which helps shake up the fact that you really only have one blaster at all times. They clearly designed her weapon as part of her character, much like the rest of the Star Wars cast has their own unique weapons, but not being able to transport picked up weapons, even just simply up ladders to the next section of the mission, was a huge bummer for me, and it honestly just doesn't make any sense. The only saving grace is that Kay's blaster is a multi-tool with several different fire modes that also work with environmental navigation. I very rarely switched mid-combat to different weapons lying on the ground because I never really felt the need to. The AI is pretty unintelligent in firefights, either running right at you in swarms, standing out in the open, or just sitting behind cover with their head visible. They seldom present a real challenge, but Kay does take a lot of damage with only a few handful of shots killing her, and I played on medium. But if you were ever to get into a firefight, let's say that you can't win, Kay's speeder is there to make a quick extraction. I was surprised by how fun this thing is to drive because I haven't liked a single driving experience in any Ubisoft game prior to this. It's always felt floaty and unresponsive. The irony being that Kay's speeder floats and somehow has a lot more tactile controls than vehicles that touch the ground in other games. There are upgrades to obtain for this to enhance speed, handling, and so on, but even the base speeder has enough kick to make you feel like you are actually making good progress in the world. It's quick, agile, and the drift system never gets old, which also comes in handy for when rival speeders show up. Now, this is one of the worst parts of the experience for me. Unlike a game like, let's say, Red Dead Redemption 2, where you can freely draw your weapon and shoot wherever you want. For some reason, Outlaws gives you the freedom of a speeder in an open world, but then confines you to such a linear, unskilled gameplay loop. The only combat ability you can use on this thing is a quick shot lock-on that targets up to 3 enemies. It's on a meter that gets charged by being under fire. So if I have 9 guys chasing me, which does happen, I have to dodge fire, build up a meter, and use the ability 3 times, and each time after I use it, I have to wait for them to shoot at me to build it up again, which in all honesty is just really time consuming and it grows quickly annoying. Especially when you have a low reputation with a faction and they constantly send guys after you, it just disrupts the flow of exploration. The good news is you can just stop and shoot them all, and sometimes they won't even get off their speeders, they'll just stand there like idiots, and there is an option to evade them through the terrain where you can make them crash with some skilled driving, and that to me is very satisfying because it's very Endor-like. So I guess there is more than one way to deal with this scenario, but the one they want you to use is so limiting. The Trailblazer is the second travel companion piece to Kay's journey, and let me tell you, this thing is fun to fly and walk around in. It harkens back to Mass Effect, where you could talk to the crew, use a workbench, and dabble into customization. It feels like a ship that is lived in, but unlike the Normandy, you can actually fly this thing, yet another vehicle that is fun to handle. Flying through space is a lot of fun, and so are the space battles. Though, locking onto enemy ships kind of puts you on an on-rail segment, taking away from the actual skill. You don't have to do this, I didn't most of the time and still had success. These battles can actually get very intense too. If you start a conflict with the Empire, they will send bigger threats after you, and it doesn't take long to be under constant fire. Sometimes a jump to light speed is necessary, and even hectic when you're trying to evade shots while building up the meter to slip away. One thing I'll add is, I saw people asking if you could get up from the cockpit mid-spaceflight like you could in Starfield, and the answer is no. You cannot do that here. But somehow Massive made these 4 planets feel like a seamless journey. You never feel like you hit a loading screen unless you die. Starfield. The travel between systems and landing sequences is addicting even if the game takes away the controls from you. Like the speeder, there are lots of upgrades for this thing if you are willing to sink in the time. Games under Ubisoft are known positively for one aspect: creating gorgeous open worlds with interesting encounters, lots of side quests, and some unique mini-games to partake in as a distraction. It makes exploration rewarding and a worthwhile pursuit, and Outlaws is no different. In fact, I'd say this game has more to offer in terms of variety than several other past Ubisoft games. Maybe that is because, well, Massive developed this game, but they are still a subsidiary of Ubisoft technically, so there are several arcade games you can find from which you can gain credits from, a few high-stakes games like Canto Bight Races to bet on, and Sabacc, the card game from Solo: A Star Wars Story, which has a lot more depth than I figured it would with stuff to unlock for it. I'm not one for card games in my media. I never went out of my way to play Gwent in The Witcher 3 or poker in Red Dead, not often anyway, but here I just find myself seeking it out. It's extremely simple, but hey, maybe that's why I like it. I truly think this game is at its best when you are just exploring at your own pace. The cities are dense and have a lot of really cool details you could easily miss, like this cook chopping up meat, or this guy playing with a bouncy ball. Details like this show me that the level designers had fun doing their job. There are interesting conversations to listen into too, maybe you'll even get a side quest from it. You can go into canteens, change the music in the jukebox, and simply just sit and enjoy the atmosphere. There are random encounters in the world that offer rewards too, like Imperial raids. The open world maps are expansive, but sometimes it requires a lot of driving to find something. There are lots of cool locations to explore, but there's a lot of space between them. Tatooine is one such planet, and I've yet to discover even a fraction of what it has to offer. You probably all knew this in typical fashion, but this game also came with many outposts to clear. They are worth doing for the treasure chest, but unlike Far Cry, the freedom to take them down is way less expansive. You knock guys out, you shoot, or you stun them. You don't have a bow or a long-range weapon to thin the herd before going in, which is strange because you get binoculars. That hurts the experience for me personally, but with that said, there are multiple ways to get into these bases if you have the tools, some of which you unlock just by playing the story. The world's got that Metroidvania style gameplay, where you'll find a door or a panel you can get into, but not without a tool you'll have yet to acquire, so there are always incentives to further explore areas after receiving them. But moving on, Massive boasted about the Syndicate system before launch, with it being one of the biggest innovative features in this game. I enjoy the system, and I like that it does change the world in dynamic ways, but I just wish it had more lasting consequences. Each of the 4 syndicates, being the Hutt Cartel, Pike Syndicate, Crimson Dawn, and the Shiga clan, all offer their own rewards for siding with them. Each of them also occupy different areas of the maps, that when siding with them allows you to roam without conflict. There are 5 ratings: terrible, bad, poor, good, and excellent. A terrible rating system gets you into gunfights, and an excellent rating affords you heavy discounts, traversal through their territories, the ability to take their materials, better contracts, and unique cosmetics tied to individual factions. It's a really interesting idea until you realize how gullible all the syndicates are. I can spend 10 hours blasting the Hutt clan and then decide to win them over and build up my reputation to get their rewards. There is no lasting impact in order for the game to allow the player to do everything in one run. That's really unfortunate because it means that these choices are merely there as an illusion of choice, and it tells you who you're going to fight for the foreseeable future. It's just kind of shallow, unfortunately. At least the rewards are worth doing, and the contracts can be quite hard. You only get one chance to do them, and if you fail, well, you just lose the mission with no real repercussions. There are some immersion breaking elements to this system too, like, for instance, I had a good reputation with the Crimson Dawn, but I got caught stealing in their compound, so they kicked me out with a small decline in my reputation. thinking, well, they wouldn't let me back in for a while because they just caught me stealing. Well, no, I went back in, got caught stealing, got escorted out, and then turned around and went back and did it all over again. It just makes these insanely dangerous organizations feel like dogs with all bark and no bite. Still, the system gives you a lot to do, but I can't say how long it'll take until the variety wears thin. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Performance and fidelity. A lot of reviewers said they experience lots of performance issues like crashing and bad frame drops. I'm not sure if this is an exclusive PC issue, but it's terrible either way. No game should ship like this. I'm not here to discredit any of that, but my experience was way different. I played this on my Xbox Series S and the game mostly held a solid smooth 30 FPS for a majority of my 25 hours. I didn't experience any crashes, severe frame drops, or large graphical issues. There was some noticeable pop-in at times, some weird texture loading issues, and AI that would get stuck on environmental collisions, stunting my progress. I also had some really weird audio problems, with NPC dialogue mixed at the same level as a cutscene I was watching, making it hard to understand what K and ND5 were saying. A few siren noises in the final missions were overlapping so bad I had to restart the game because it was driving me insane. And for whatever reason, the whole final mission had my controller incessantly vibrating, so much so that I had to turn the vibration off. Even restarting the game did not fix this. I don't expect games to look all that great on the limited hardware that I play on, but I was surprised. The quality isn't as sharp as it would be on the Series X, and the water reflections look incredibly muddy and distracting, but the rest of the game looked great. The dynamic day and night cycle helped make the world feel alive, but it also shows the beauty of the engine and the art style of these foreign planets. The texture quality was good, and using the photo mode shows how much detail is fully on display here. But let's talk about the lip syncing, because this is the worst lip syncing I have ever experienced in a game since like Oblivion. It's even worse than that. I'm talking absolutely terrible.
Questions. Yeesh. A death mark from Zarek Besh.
What did you tell them?
And if this is something that could ruin the experience for you, by all means, do not buy this game. There were times where it looked really good, and then other times when the dialogue was completely off, so much so that the characters' mouths would stop moving before the dialogue was even over. It's so strange because Assassin's Creed Unity had amazing facial animations, and the animations here are pretty good on characters with subtle eye and brow movements, but the lips are so bad. So bad. I personally don't know how they shipped the game out with such a glaring quality issue. I'm not even an overly picky guy, but at times it was really distracting. I just don't know how this stuff happens with like mocap and everything else. The final area I kind of wanted to explore is the music the game puts forth. The main OST for the story suits the orchestral vibe that Star Wars has always had, but it feels uniquely its own. There are plenty of ambient tracks when exploring, and each world has its own tracks that make them feel distinctly different. Tatooine has this one track that absolutely slaps. Like, listen to this. I'm a big lover of soundtracks. It's usually one of the things that sticks out to me most when I play games and watch movies, so suffice it to say, this is definitely one that I'm going to be putting on my Spotify playlist. On a side note before I end this, it's a great time for gamers because many companies have been including a tremendous amount of accessibility options in their games, and Outlaws is no different. There are so many options here to customize your gameplay experience, as well as options for gamers for all handicaps to enjoy. I shouldn't have to say it, but that's incredible. Everything from text-to-speech narration, colorblind modes, and abilities to turn off different gameplay mechanics. They even have an extremely easy mode for people that may struggle with traditional modes. I know Ubisoft gets a lot of hate, but this is very commendable and I respect them for it. So Star Wars Outlaws, in a number of ways, it mimics the typical Ubisoft formula a lot of people have grown tired of. There's a lot of content here and a decent amount of variety within the world's most beloved galaxy far, far away. It offers great worlds to explore, a story with a heart, and a mix of both good and bad gameplay elements. It's more an experience to shut your brain off to and just have a good time. It's not going to make you think or offer you anything profound, and that is okay. A lot of this game really worked for me, and I can't wait to jump back into it. It is a shame that there's no New Game Plus. I hope they do add that in the future, but I like the story enough to just play through it again. Those are all of my thoughts on Star Wars Outlaws. Are you gonna buy it? Are you not? Let me know in the comments below. If you like the content, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe. I also have a membership program now on the channel, so if you want to support me and you like what I do, that would be great. But of course, never ever feel forced into doing something like that. If you want to, you can. If you don't, that is totally fine. I'm just glad that you're enjoying the content. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go watch A New Hope and then jump back into this game. because I'm on a Star Wars kick now and I can't help myself. So, good night and good lunch.